Welcome to DevOps 2.0, the ultimate JS delivery pipeline. This is a recording of a workshop we gave at the 2021 DevOps JS conference. For your convenience, we split the recording into 9 parts. For all relevant links, timestamps, and more information, see the description box below. So the first Git workflow that I'd like to discuss, and that our setup, these two pipelines that I just created for you, are getting us closer and closer to, is Gitflow. And Gitflow, as I mentioned, it's not a new invention, so to say. It's been described in a blog post back in 2010 by Vincent Driessen, I suppose it's Driessen. And the main premise of this workflow is dedicated different long-running branches to different purposes, and a couple of different short-running branches to different purposes. So we have our master branch, which is the branch that is supposed to be, as I mentioned, production ready. It's supposed to have its code ready to be deployed at any given time. Then a clone of that branch is the develop branch. And this branch is set up to accept whatever new features or new changes you and your team are working on and are preparing. And how do you work on these changes? You branch off from the develop branch and you create new feature branches. When you are ready, done with working on a feature or a refactor, you merge your changes back to the develop branch. So how do you create new releases in this workflow? Well, at some point when there are enough new features, maybe a set amount of new features that you and your team have decided that you need to have before you create your next release, a release engineer, a release manager comes, inspect the develop branch and says, hey, we have like 5 new features here that we said that we are going to deliver in the next quarter. So let's take these and release them. So what you do then is, or the release engineer or manager, they branch off from the develop branch and take the code from that moment at the develop branch and say that this is going to be our release. You then tweak the release branch, make sure that everything there is as tight as can be, that all kinks are ironed out, nothing is missing, so to say, from that release. And when you're ready, you create that release and you push that release to the master branch. Then from the master branch, you synchronize your master branch, you merge it back to develop, and then you can start the cycle over again. There are also, so you have 2 types of short-lived branches. The short-lived branch number 1 is the feature branch. The other short-lived branch is the release branch, but I think that it could live a little bit longer than the feature branch. Then you have the hotfix branches, which aim to focus on fixing bugs that are found on the master branch. Now, this workflow, it's been adapted very widely. Remember that it's been first described as a great idea for a workflow back in 2010. So nowadays, if you try to do some research on Gitflow, there are a lot of people that are frowning upon Gitflow, that are saying that Gitflow should no longer be recommended. But I think that everybody should try it when it's managed the right way. It could work very good for projects of different sizes. And remember that this is just an idea, a blueprint of a workflow that you can use, and you can then tailor further to suit your needs. But this Gitflow workflow, it has this 3-tier division between branches. At least in my opinion, there are 3 main tiers. So we have the master branch, we have the feature branches, and we have the develop branch. So now let's close the presentation for a minute and go back to our pipeline setup. And as you can see, we have the pipeline that runs for our production. So for our master branch, we have our pipeline that runs unit tests on branches. So we could rename it to say feature, right? So that we know that it runs on feature branches. And what we're missing here, we have 2 pipelines in this 3-tier setup, 3-tier pipeline division. So what we need is another pipeline that would build our app and deploy it to some sort of a staging environment from the develop branch. Now, to save some time, I'm not going to create another long-running branch in my repository, but I can show you how you could set up a pipeline to release an app to a staging environment. And you might be thinking now, well, but you've just shown us how you can deploy the application to a server. So how that's going to be different? Well, if you think about creating a staging environment, there's this aspect of infrastructure. So you'll have to host that staging environment somewhere, right? And as we know, the more servers, the more money you have to pay for infrastructure. And if you're using Buddy, you could benefit from one of our new internal features that is works just great for setting up these staging environments. And this feature is called Sandboxes. If you look over to the left navigation bar, you can find it right after pipelines. So I'm going to click it. And what are sandboxes? Well, again, not the main focus on this workshop, but to explain it to you in a few words, sandboxes, virtual machines running different distros of Linux. There are a few to choose from. They are running internal on Buddy infrastructure, and you can set up such a virtual machine and integrate it almost seamlessly with your pipelines. And for example, use it to be the deployment target for your application and to act as a staging server where you can, for example, test your app manually or run some additional tests, which I'm going to, by the way, show you in a later part of this webinar. So right now, let's create a new sandbox quickly. As I mentioned, a couple of Linux distros to choose from. You can, with playbooks, you can define what you want your sandbox to be pre-installed with. I'm going to need Node.js since I'm going to be using Node Live Server to run the app. And you can define, of course, the name of the sandbox. I'm going to call it staging so that it fits our Gitflow theme. You can adjust the resources you give the sandbox, but I'm going to leave it at the default value and click Create Sandbox. It's going to take a few seconds to launch. As you can see, it's already online, so very quick and very quickly deployed, and it waits for a service at the port 80. So what I have to do with this sandbox right now, as I mentioned, it's a Linux virtual machine. It comes with Node installed, so I have Node.js and npm installed here. And what I want to use to run this app in this staging environment is Live Server. So I'm going to install that. Okay, and just quickly, I'm going to create a new directory. Okay, it's here. Right. And now we have this server, this sandbox running Node Live Server, and I have created a directory that's where I'm going to copy over the build application. Let me switch over to pipelines. And since this pipeline in our scenario is going to be very similar to the production pipeline, I'm just going to copy the prod one. I'm going to clone all actions again, and let's tweak that. So I'm going to call it stage, or even develop by the branch name, but let's call it stage. Deploy to staging environment. That's going to be the name of the pipeline. I'm going to trigger it manually from the main branch just to show you the app running on a staging server that's within Buddy infrastructure. So that's it. Now for the actions. Again, I need to get rid of these two actions, the deployment actions. And in their place, what I want to do is I want to transfer do basically the exact same thing, but instead of transferring the files to an external server, I want to transfer them to the Sandbox server I have just set up in front of you. So let's filter the actions by the word sand. And here you can see that we have a few actions available that deal with sandboxes. So the first action I need to add is sandbox upload. And this one is going to upload the files from the build directory to that directory I created. So let's add this action. And now, as you remember, the final step before the app actually runs is running the script that fires it up. So again, I'm going to filter by sand. And here you can see run commands in Sandbox with this SSH icon. So it looks familiar, right? We have this terminal view. Again, I need to make the run script executable. And then I just need to run it. And as it was with the actual server, I need to tell Buddy in the context of what directory these commands need to be run. So let me find that staging directory that you saw me create. It's here. I'm going to use it and I'm going to add this action. Now, I'm going to leave the notification action here, just as I think it's a really good practice to add notification actions to your pipelines to be as transparent as you can. But for now, let's run the pipeline and see how our app looks when it runs on our staging server. And again, as I mentioned, I'm running the pipeline of the main branch because I didn't want to spend additional time configuring the repository, and I didn't want to create the develop branch. So for today's workshop, technically it's enough for me to show you everything running on the main branch and any additional feature branches. But if you were to employ this in your project, you'd want to create a separate develop branch where you would run this pipeline and preferably have it run on push. So whenever a work, as you remember from that presentation I've shown you when I was explaining Gitflow, whenever your work is done on the feature branch and you merge your feature back to develop, this pipeline would trigger, test the app again with any tests you want, and then deploy the app to a staging server where you could check it out. Maybe your QA team and these guys could play around with the app a bit and check it out on their own. Right. So as you can see, the pipeline has run successfully. Again, about 1 minute 9 seconds. As you remember, subsequent runs get a bit quicker every time around. So now let's switch to Sandboxes and let's check out our app running on Buddy infrastructure. As you can see, the same heading as we've set up with our first push to the main branch. So hello JS Nation, and the app is fully functional. And as you can see here in the address bar, the application is running on our very own staging server, not on the external server I have set up, which you can see here. This has a different address. Okay, so this has been Gitflow. So far we've been over the basics. We've created a few 3 pipelines that when working together would work great with Gitflow. But Gitflow is not the only one when it comes to Git workflows. It's not the best one, and I'm not telling you that you should use one or another, but I think that it's worth exploring some other workflows. So let's do that.